Hello and welcome to the Franz Van Cat interview. I'm Annette Young. For decades, Colombia has been torn apart by a violent conflict as its government has battled armed rebel groups along with drug cartels. But at the end of last year, the government made a rather surprising announcement. After 10 years of a successful military campaign, it was now ready to sit down and talk with the FARC. The FARC, of course, being the country's largest rebel group. However, having said that, the FARC is far from being a spent force. And with me today to talk about those talks, not to mention Bogotá's rather fraught relationship with its neighbour Venezuela, is the country's Defence Minister, Juan Carlos Pinzón. Minister, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us here.
Now, let's begin by talking about those negotiations with the FARC. We're now 6 months in and the government has already reached an agreement on land reform, but there are, however, 5 other rather thorny points that need to be resolved, and the President has set a deadline of November. That's only 5 months away. Is that deadline feasible?
Well, first of all, let me tell that President Santos' desire is to take Colombia to peace and prosperity. And he has set all his policy and all his strategy to reach that level. He's working on poverty reduction, on reduction of inequality, on diplomacy, on reconciliation, on economic development and competitiveness. And certainly he has supported us on strengthening the armed forces and continue to produce maybe some of the toughest blows to the FARC, to the ELN, and to the criminal bands in Colombia. So that strategy as a whole is really moving the country towards a better future for peace and prosperity. And certainly the negotiations are expected to move ahead, but certainly as a consequence of the strengthening of the armed forces and their effectiveness.
But let's talk about some of those issues that need to still be resolved and the idea that you've got a timeline that this all has to be done within 5 months. For instance, disarming the FARC. I mean, how do you do that, given that many of those members do believe that if they lay down their arms, that they could be killed in revenge for the atrocities that they've been accused of?
Well, I think that what might happen in the scenario is that the Colombian armed forces will protect every citizen as it happens every day. Let me remind you that every year, by 2012, we had 1,000 demobilized members of the FARC and ELN. And these people has recovered their life, has been able to reach their families, and by the way, they have been protected by the Colombian security forces, both the military and the national police. So if that scenario comes, certainly what will happen is that we have a very professional, highly standards from our armed forces, and they have been being a strengthening of as well in their legitimacy, both in education in human rights and in international humanitarian law.
But do you really believe that can all be done within 5 months?
I think to solve so long a conflict takes time. Certainly, the sooner the better. And certainly, if the FARC does not move ahead and does not comply to this wonderful opportunity that President Santos and the Colombian people has offered, what they will see is the continuity of the strengthening of the armed forces, of the strengthening of the state, of the strengthening of institutions, justice, that will continue to deny their criminal activities.
And the other issue, of course, is that drug trafficking has been, seen as the major source of income for the FARC. How does the government attempt to resolve that issue?
Well, still drug problem is an issue in Colombia. But if you look to recent history, the drug problem right now is around 30% from what it was 10, 12 years ago, both in cultivated hectares of coca or the potential production of cocaine. The most recent numbers published by UN are showing that we are below 50,000 hectares of coca, which is the lowest numbers in those statistics are recorded more than 10 years ago. And I think that shows that we should continue to fight drug trafficking because it is, at the end, the source of violence, the source of funding from criminal activity in general in Colombia, and even corruption. Certainly, what we should continue to do is in those areas to offer social programs, alternatives, and other products for peasants to, have a source of income rather than coca.
Do you really believe, given that there's still a portion of the country that lives under effectively FARC rule, that you as a government can establish a presence in those areas, restore law and order, and offer those economic opportunities?
Frankly, that is what is going on. What has been changing in Colombia is that more and more public forces are making presence on every town of the country, are getting farther and farther in the country, on the whole territory. And this is giving the opportunity for agencies of the state, education, healthcare, infrastructure, and social programs to come and be part of what we have as opportunities for the nation. And let me tell you that that old Robin Hood story is false. That is the excuse that some members of terrorist groups and criminal bands are using to keep going on their criminal activities and keep going on businesses like drug trafficking, criminal mining, and other sources to benefit themselves, and many of them live out of the country for a long time.
Now, the FARC is wanting a ceasefire, an ongoing ceasefire, as opposed to even just a temporary one. The government is saying no. How can you negotiate when there's still ongoing hostilities?
Well, President Santos has been very clear on this. What he says is that he wants the end of conflict, not to keep this conflict going forever. And let me put it this way. If the terrorist organizations decide to renounce to their activities in drug trafficking, in extortion, in kidnapping, in recruiting childs, maybe when that happens is because this is the time really to stop our efforts to go after them. But the reason why Colombian public forces go after those criminals is because of their crimes, not because of their ideas. In Colombia, we have an open democracy. There are parties from every color. They can even be government, and they have been very successful sometimes, have been a failure other times, but anyone has access to power, from mayors to the president of Colombia. And in our opinion, if those groups decide to enter and be part of the political system as the president has offered, that could be feasible, particularly if they leave back all their criminal activities.
Now, your neighbour, Venezuela, has been playing a rather key role in mediating between all parties in this conflict resolution. Of course, however, relations have taken a distinct turn for the worst in recent months with the death of President Hugo Chavez and his successor, President Nicolás Maduro, going as far as accusing Colombian paramilitaries of trying to kill him. That doesn't bode well for a healthy relationship between the two countries, does it?
I think President Santos and Colombian government has been clear on the way we want to manage relationships, particularly with our neighbors, particularly with nations that are brothers on any circumstance. Certainly there are differences between styles, between governments, between people. But I think diplomatic channels are the ones that should be used in order to have a relationship. I think prudence is the most reasonable tool anyone can use in this type of relationship. Certainly Colombia has the firmness. Certainly Colombia has its convictions. We know where we're going to. But at the same time, we are very respectful to others.
Is it a frustrating relationship, though, at the moment? How would you describe the nature of the relationship?
I think we have to be respectful, and I think we have to be prudent. That's what a good relationship is all about, and differences have to be respected. both sides.
And Venezuela, along with other South American nations who are under the rule of leftist leaders, would accuse Colombia of being too much under the thumb of Washington. I mean, is it the case that it's an unbalanced relationship that you have with the Americans? Is it a one-sided relationship?
I think that will be an inappropriate affirmation, but I would tell at the same time that we have to be prudent, that we have to be wise, that it is more important than personal preferences, the stability of our neighborhood and of our nations. And that's how we have been working out. And actually, we prefer cooperation. Cooperation is the thing that we appreciate the most, and we have to recognize that against drug trafficking, specifically drug trafficking, Venezuelan authorities have been very cooperative. And those are the things that we want to develop. We want to build into positives rather than to focus on to negatives.
Minister, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for being with us. And that's it for this edition of the France 24 interview. Do stay tuned for more news and headlines which are coming up very shortly.